Our next panel is focused on local leadership. And so it's like, what are the best practices post-disaster for planning and rebuilding? And really, as you know, all disaster and recovery actually starts with local leadership. You can come on up while I'm talking. I'm not that exciting. They see me like 14 times a day. Come on, tennis. I'm very fortunate that I have relationships with all of these offices, mostly directly with the people involved. And I'm very grateful that we have a variety of experiences, from super rural, like frontier communities, to communities that have many, many MHP parks and properties that were affected, to also our very own and my friend Tennis Wick, who's right behind me, who's the director for Permit Sonoma. And please welcome them to our panel today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I missed the panel yesterday. My friend Molly was describing the surprisingly emotional experience with Jay Nichols when he read his book to the conferees here. It's a good reminder. We can get somewhat jaded attending these conferences constantly and going over technical issues and policy, that it really does impact individuals in a fundamental way. I was reminded yesterday in our permit center where we had a fire survivor come in. It was his first time that he had been into the office since the original recovery process. We normally would get about 150 people on a busy day. That first day after the fire, we had nearly 450, and still smoke coming through the building and a highly charged emotional state. So I'm glad that there are people like Jay who can remind us that this is about people, their lives, and their properties. So Tennis Wick here with the County of Sonoma. We have a comprehensive planning and construction agency, including somewhat unusually a fire division. We have the non-suppression fire responsibilities for most of the county, which means we get involved in vegetation management and hazardous material response. We leave the serious stuff to people like Steve and his colleagues out in the field. But it does allow us as practitioners to bring our experience from disaster back in and hopefully prevent them. In the last 5 years, our team, so as many people here in local government find out, you also have, in addition to your civilian work, this thing called disaster response worker. In our county, that has meant that we've spent over 60% of our time in emergency response in the last 5 years. The good news is we can bring that back and work with people like Steve on redevelopment of a property just up the road on Arnold Drive called the Sonoma Developmental Center, which will be a new community at the base of the WUI, not in it, but it will have WUI on both sides. And we were able to work with a very large consultant who was brought in to do the traffic analysis around evacuation, who got a couple of things wrong. And when they didn't know how to correct it, fortunately we had the experience in leading evacuation from 4 fires in the last 5 years, and could bring our experience into planning to prevent some of the catastrophe that we experienced earlier. So on our panel today are some folks who, again, come at this from usually a place of surprise and hopefully experience as elected officials and as administrative officials. And the thing I'd like to focus on, folks, is one of the things that I think is the greatest challenge is how do we communicate effectively with our public and how do we do that internally in a good way in a really hypercharged environment. Obviously, elected officials have that direct responsibility to their constituents. We do to the officials, and yet we also have to be working intensely to bring, in this case, the fire to fruition. So let's get started with our first panelist. Who's got the clicker? So we can have Katie from, perfect. So Katie, obviously her title here, she's obviously been a quite busy person. I had the pleasure, under unfortunate circumstances, of speaking with Dale Case, my counterpart in Boulder County on Christmas Day. Out of the blue, Googled him, his cell number came up, and I spoke with a very tired colleague. And the one thing is reassuring because he said that they were doing well. The one challenge they had was how to coordinate with cities that had never been through this before. And if you're familiar with our most recent Christmas Day fire, it was very similar to the Santa Rosa experience with Coffey Park. If you were to drive through it before the fire, you would never think, at least in the two city instances, that they were in the wild and urban interface. So with that, Katie?
Hi, my name is Katie Arrington, and I work for Boulder County. Boulder County has been since 2010, has only spent 100 days not responding to or recovering from a disaster. We're hit with disasters almost on an annual basis, some small, some large, but we've had to flex to accommodate that need. I came to this field, I chose this field. I grew up in Southern California. I experienced the Northridge earthquake as a kid. I experienced regular wildfire evacuations. So this is my chosen career field and passion. And so the Marshall Fire happened in December. It happened last December. It happened after a dry year. And it lasted for 6 or 8 hours, and burned almost 1,100 homes in 6 hours. It burned homes across 3 jurisdictions, which was just referred to. So I work for unincorporated Boulder County, which has its own building department, and then 2 cities were impacted too. So there's 3 different jurisdictions that residents are having to deal with for building and coordination. Our building department is the one that has been responding to and recovering for disasters for the last 12 years. So we have a process called Article 19, which helps residents expedite rebuilding after disaster and flexes to the needs of the disaster. And we have implemented Article 19 process since, I think, 2012. And then our biggest, the recovery office, our biggest job after a disaster is community engagement and how do we reach the impacted communities. So with this disaster and rebuilding issues, about 160 homes burned down in our jurisdiction, and we didn't have any list to contact them. So through Nextdoor and other social media, we reached out to community partners. Cheryl, who is in this room today, she helped manage the list and gather in all the information. And within about 6 weeks post-disaster, we had a list of all the names and addresses for every unincorporated Boulder County resident. And we started weekly community meetings on Fridays to reach out to those residents. So since December, weekly, we've been reaching out to those residents, talking through rebuilding processes, talking through grant funding availability, talking through what the permitting process looks like, what adjustments we need to make, and our process we try to make as community engagement friendly as possible within the constrictions of building codes through the county.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker is Supervisor Kevin Goss from the 2nd District of Plumas County here in California. Good
Thank
morning,
you.
sir.
Welcome, everybody. Kevin Goss, Plumas County. I'll tell you what, you get elected I got elected in 2012, and there is no manual for being a supervisor, as I'm sure that this is kind of, there we go. No manual out there that you can look at to become supervisor, and as you well know, it's a challenge. You never think it's going to happen to you, but it did happen to me with the Dixie Fire up in Greenville. That's my district that I represent. Boy, it was, I lost my business in downtown Greenville. We had the pharmacy, we were the oldest building in town, you know, yada, yada. A lot of that happened. That fire burnt for 2 months. It was a very long, arduous time, a lot of communication challenges as we were talking. But what we did was we formed the Dixie Fire Collaborative. We had folks that just rose up from the community that came out in droves and tried to get a hold of folks that were burned out and getting that contact list formed and available, and it was fast. That happened in about a 2 weeks period of time. We looked for unmet needs, folks that were living in tents after the fire. We live in a snow-prone area, so we ended up getting cold weather right after the fire, which folks wanted to stay in the community, but they had no places to go, and so they were camped up in the woods, and so we looked for those folks, got them shelter, got their unmet needs met through the Dixie Fire Collaborative, and then we started right into our rebuilding process along with the same unmet needs process. And working with we worked with the Dixie Fire Collaborative as county leadership to identify and go right to it. How many people do want to come back to Greenville? How many people want to come back to Indian Valley? 48% of those folks said, yes, we want to rebuild. The surprising number was 12% says, no, I cannot come back. And we took that number and we said, wow, that's amazing. So then there's this other span of folks that, yes, I want to come back, but I don't have this or I don't have that. We took that pie chart, unraveled it, and started working on those that middle portion of folks that weren't sure what they were going to do. And I told myself, I said, if I could get 50% back in this community within 2 to 3 years, we are going to be doing really good. And for those of you that don't know, Greenville is a lower income community. We're up in the mountains, not a lot of jobs. It was a logging community. There's a lot of logging going on now, I can tell you that, in a hurry. But got a lot of government jobs, stuff like that. So a lot of lower income, and we had to really dive deep into that, but I'm here to tell you right now, we are ahead of the process. We're doing really well with our Dixie Fire Collaborative, and really looking forward to meeting and talking with all of you and shared experiences, but thank you for having me, truly, thank you. Thank you,
Supervisor. Looking forward to our discussion after the panel has their comments. So next is Gabe Osburn. Gabe works for the city of Santa Rosa and was the primary person for forming the Resiliency Permit Center for the city and collaborating with the county. It's been a pleasure to work with him, even though he's an engineer. As a planner, we are the cat and dog of the American bureaucracy. So pleasure to see you, brother.
Thank you, Tennis, and good morning, everyone. I'm just jealous of Tennis's hair. I always have been. I can't grow it. What are you going to do?
And the beard.
And the beard. Yes, as Tennis mentioned, I managed the fire rebuild efforts in the city of Santa Rosa after the Tubbs fire. So as you can imagine, I know there's quite a few people here from outside of the area, but also quite a few people from the area. Tubbs fire really changed the fabric of our community in a lot of different ways. So prior to 2017, wildfires were really one of those things that you thought were once in a lifetime. There was significant wildfire in '65. But from a hazard mitigation standpoint, the biggest threat was earthquake. Every plan was for the earthquake. When 2017 rolled around, obviously that changed it, but 2017 didn't do it alone. We got a break in 2018, but as we know, the Paradise Fire, the Camp Fire, happened in 2018. So 18 was one of the more destructive, if not the most destructive fire season in the state of California. In 2019, we were revisited by the Kincaid Fire. That fire did not get into the city of Santa Rosa, but we did lose units in the county. And then in 2020, we were revisited by the Glass Fire. So this went from a once-in-a-lifetime to we prepare for it every year. And it really has changed the fabric of not only how we prepare for the initial events of the fire, which are literally keeping people safe, health, life, safety, making sure you're keeping life intact, to the rebuild effort, which has been a challenge. And what we've seen in Santa Rosa is we've seen actually quite a bit of activity over the last 5 years. We're running up against our 5-year anniversary. And when we went into this, we thought that there was this assumption that these units could be rebuilt in 3 years. And a lot of that was driven by the insurance money. And most of the units lost, in Santa Rosa we lost a total of 3,043. Those were built over the course of 30 years by subdivision builders, maybe a handful. So we were trying to figure out how do you develop a model that can take what was done in 30 years and turn that around in 3 years. So realistically inside the department we said, well, it's going to be more like 3 years, but more like 15 to get there. Where we currently stand now is we have 71% that are occupied and we have 97% that are somewhere in the building stage. We will increase the number of units that we had in those rebuild areas when this is all said and done. So I get a lot of questions about how did you do that? And it wasn't me, it wasn't the city, it wasn't the construction industry, it wasn't the community, it was everybody working together. And as Tennis mentioned, it's all about community. As a local jurisdiction, especially a permitting agency, if you have never had the opportunity to run one, I would say do it. It builds character, it's an interesting experience. You learn a lot about regulation and you learn—
Everybody wants to get a permit.
Everybody wants a permit, yeah. So we started that with literally you should not require building permits for any rebuilds because building permits take a year. That's where we started. That was the narrative that was floating around in the community. We had to change that narrative to say that it's going to take us 5 days to do the building permit instead of a year. So why would you trust that statement when there was no pattern of that happening? And to Tennis's point, it's that communication. So we had elected officials that weren't sure we could make that work. We weren't even sure we could make that work internally. So early on in the process, I remember being at the local assistance center and the emotions were very raw. You're dealing with people that are 2 days removed from losing everything they have. And trying to get that person to talk about, well, do you want to rebuild was a very difficult thing. And there were little tactics like, well, what did you not like about your house? And what would you change? Did you not like your kitchen? And we would take that and form that into policy. And that policy created as much flexibility as possible. So we knew that there would be a variety of different ways that it could construct, and we knew we needed to support that, and we knew in a lot of ways we needed to get out of the way. And what most people don't know about permitting agencies is they are actually consumer protection. Most of the regulations are built for quality of that home long term. So we tried to balance out getting out of the way with also consumer protection and protecting the right of way. So the conversations were very dynamic. The first few months were listening. We took what the community wanted to do. We turned that into policy. We worked problems directly with them. I know Pam is in this room and she was part of Coffee Strong, and we formed our relationships with them early on. I remember sitting in multiple meetings over the course of 4 or 5 years, and we would just work problems together. So it could be as simple as mailbox placement, or I can't find a contractor, or my contractor isn't producing and it's created this issue. And we worked that problem and peeled back the onion one at a time. So I think with these, there isn't any sort of pill that can cure the problem, or there isn't a roadmap that works for every community. Every community is different. The desire to come back is going to be different. The economics are going to be different. But a local agency, the one thing we can stress is we communicate with all the partners. It's the construction industry, it's the community, it's our elected officials. But when we found when we were communicating with the public and that communication was working and we were building that relation, the elected officials supported. There was no longer this question that you couldn't do it. They saw the communication happening and they saw the results of that. So it was, I'm pretty proud of being part of it. I made a lot of good relationships as part of it. I'll never forget some of the faces. I always get a little teary as part of it because it was, as basically a public official, you don't get the opportunity to impact people's lives the way that I did in that case. And you never want to be put in that situation, but the reality is I'll never forget it.
Yeah, and I can say that the relationship endures because now we all really communicate by cell phone and text, where before, and thank God all the stakeholder meetings are gone, and I mean everyone just does everything a lot faster. I would say everyone's a lot more constructively impatient about what we need to do, not just in disaster response, but in our civilian relationships as well. All right. On to our next panelist. Thank you very much, Gabe. Supervisor Ramos from Napa County, next door neighbor. We've had a lot of shared experiences in the last 5 years, earthquakes and fire. So thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to start with, Tennis, you asked a question about, what is the role of the elected official? And so I'm going to take you back. And so my first day on the job, I was elected in 2016. Our first, yeah, that sets a stage. I was sworn in on January 8th, and we had $40 million in road damage that day from a flood, and that was my first day on the job. So when you say disaster worker, I feel like I am. I haven't had a day out of recovery as a supervisor. There was no onboarding for me as a supervisor. It was, would you like to come see the other side of your floodgates closing on my first day on the job? 9 months to the day of me taking my oath, the Tubbs fire broke out, the Nuns fire, and the Atlas fire, which became the Napa complex. I had found myself as chair in my first year. So I've been on the job 9 months. I'm chair. I don't have a CEO. And we have the worst disaster that Napa County has ever seen. What I learned quickly during that time, and I'll share an anecdotal story with you of it, but what I learned quickly is that the tone for the community is set by your elected officials. If your elected officials, people in my position, don't have it together, are acting chaotic, do not have a streamlined communication, do not have a cohesive message, and do not inspire hope, your community will lose it. Your community will not be able to move forward. When you think about what these people are facing, it's beyond heartbreaking. It's not that I didn't want to fall apart every single day. It's not that I didn't fall apart every single day. But not one person through a camera was permitted to see me fall apart. I was the county spokesperson. I had to hold it together. Not just for my 145,000 people, but some of us did things differently. Napa County was having 9 a.m. press briefings, and Sonoma wasn't quite there yet. So all of a sudden, we were carrying the load for all of our regional partners in communication. And I'll never forget the day that BBC walked in with a camera and I said, "What is going on?" And what was going on was that we had a message of communication. We were able to be steady in that communication. My greatest lessons learned to set the stage for recovery is that elected officials need to get out of the way of their staff. And you laugh, and I've had more than my own occasion of like, oops, there I am, don't need to be there. But elected officials really should be doing your ICMA training for elected and executives to understand disaster recovery and what that hierarchy is. We did it afterwards, and we did okay. And looking back, we did okay. But it's really important to be able to understand that your role is not on the ground to make those operational decisions. Your role is on the ground to observe operationally what's happening, to be able to make the policy decisions. And so really, you know, as staff and members of the community, I would say, give your elected officials a job to do. They'll do it. We will do it. And, you know, give us a camera. We'll get there. Like, we have no problem getting in front of a camera. But really understanding that our role is to set the tone. Just last week, I was at a county employee's retirement party, and there was a friend of his was there. And she came up to me to introduce herself. I had never met her. And she said, "I wanted to tell you that I lived on Wild Horse Valley Road during the 2017 fires, which burned the Atlas Peak fire coming down." And she said, "And you were the only thing that gave me hope each and every day. And I had coffee with you every morning at 9 a.m. It's been 4.5 years. People remember my name. They come up to me in the grocery store. They say thank you. They see my children, and they say, we love your mom. People ask me when I'm bringing my 9 a.m. coffee show back because it was setting a tone. And that tone was incredibly important to be able to be honest with the community. That's the most important thing. And the last thing I would say is be willing to say, I don't know. There is nothing worse from an elected official trying to come off and give everyone answers. When our world was crumbling, and as we all know, on the third day was the worst day. When if the winds came in, we would have lost everything. And I was looking at evacuating the entire city of Napa and what our plan was going to be to evacuate our evacuation center, right? Because we hadn't heard the worst, there was the worst. And as we were dealing with that, the most important thing was to be able to say, I don't know. When the reporters are in your face saying how many people have been evacuated, I don't know. How many houses have been destroyed? I don't know. Because, as Tennis said, this is a people game, right? Disaster and disaster recovery is about the people. Yes, we'd love to save people's homes. We'd love to. That it means so much to them emotionally. They carry this trauma with them forever. But our job is to keep people safe. That's our principal job in disaster. And so not being afraid to say, I don't know. Set the tone. Be hopeful when you can, but don't blow smoke.
Thank you, Supervisor. So the last speaker before we get into the inquisition of the panel is my colleague, Ted Zook. And Ted is the Community Development Director for Jackson County in Southern Oregon. He's been quite busy the last several years in the dual role. Welcome, brother.
Thank you. Is this working right? Good. I have to say first, I'm humbled to be here. The people that I am around, I am from Jackson County, Oregon. For you, those of you who know, that's right across the border from California. That's where everybody from California, as they cross the border, they say, I'm here, and then it's where they retire. But it is a pretty rural county, which made the disaster that much more worse in the fact that it, as my colleague here from Colorado, we had 2 cities that were also impacted. The fire came through, and within a day, there were 2,900 structures that were impacted, 2,500 residences gone, and when I say gone, gone. There's nothing left. They're on the ground. And 178 businesses. Those 178 businesses, what that amounted to was the 2 cities, that was their entire business districts. So in Oregon, one of the things that happens is our building departments are also responsible for doing damage assessment. As usually we're talking about earthquakes, we're talking about floods. Nothing prepares you for a wildfire. When you go out there, if you don't have, I guess that's probably my first bit of advice, is make sure your IT has the mapping ready to go. Because when you go out there, you don't know what you're looking at. We got into the rural areas, and it was interesting because we found structures that obviously were not permitted because we were looking at the wrong structures. And you run into those issues where the people are telling you, like, no, don't say anything about that one because my insurance company isn't going to pay for that one. They're going to pay for the other one. Go look at the other one. So those damage assessments, when you start looking at it, whether it's safe or unsafe, and I can get into a whole another 5 minutes on that one, on people calling up and saying, don't tell me my structure is destroyed, when, yeah, clearly something was destroyed. But with that, we had 17 manufactured home parks that were destroyed, and that was most of our affordable housing. So in the unincorporated part of the county, that was 80% of the residential that we lost. And as most of you probably know, manufactured homes are not something that you can readily get. There was a 2-year waiting list for them. we had to get innovative about things. My fellow PhD post-hole digger partner out there, Michael Mortar, was instrumental in helping us do things like change law to make it that you can have a modular structure within a manufactured dwelling park. Because one of the things you run into is you're not going to have the manpower, you're not going to have the materials, and you're not going to have the contractors to be able to do the work. So off-site construction is something that definitely needs to be part of your mix. And I will say, you know, we talked about the emotional part of things, is like nothing does prepare you. I know the day after the fire, we went out and I had to pull over across the side of the road and I just started bawling. And that's not me, I don't do that. But the devastation is something that you're not going to be prepared for. On the plus side, one of the things I will say is that you really get to know your other jurisdictions well. There are a lot of people, supervisors, we have commissioners, you know, council members, mayors, the people in the planning and building departments in other jurisdictions that you don't talk to on a regular basis. Now all of a sudden you're communicating with them all the time. And it's one of those things that you should really foster those relationships now and keep them going. As people change, we always make sure, at least I do, I try and make sure that I know who the new people are and introduced, and they're like, who are you? It's like when the time comes, we're going to be working together a lot. And that disaster, you know, the damage assessment part of it was really what brought us all together. You know, we heard earlier from the grant panel of, you know, don't depend on FEMA. FEMA will be there eventually, but they're not going to be there right away. And that leaves it up to you. So in the case of the damage assessment, we went out in 2 weeks, had the entire damage assessment of all those structures done. We had the trucks, we had the people, they had their tablets, they had their cell phones. We knew the area. It just made more sense. If you have the people from FEMA that are doing the windshield surveys, and you have search and rescue teams doing things, and everybody's putting data in willy-nilly, it'll all get there eventually, but you want to know how many properties are out there in the storage so that your customers or your survivors have the ability to say, here's a photograph. You can see clearly there's nothing there. It was a government agency that went out and did this. Give me my insurance. You know, I guess right now where we are is we're a little over two and a half years after the fact of the wildfires. Is we're about 25% rebuilt on those manufactured home parks. But the good news is things like the innovation of bringing in the modular homes. We have 100 on the ground right now, and there's another 100 coming that are going to be put in those parks. That's going to do a lot for changing things. And yes, it's 2.5 years out, but they wouldn't be there otherwise. I guess one of the things I'll leave with is you can't rely on the FEMA funding coming right away. You can't rely on FEMA being there right there, and that is not a slam on them. I mean, you heard how hard it is to get through all that. State legislatures have your supervisors, have your commissioners get a hold of state legislature. We got a lot of funding that came in because of that, and that's a stopgap at least to help you out. One of the things we did with that funding is we took a clue from after the fire, and we have our own Wildfire Resiliency Permit Center. This is where people can come in, they get expedited plans. It's about a block up the street from our office, but they get to come in, they get to tell their story, you know, which they don't really get to do if they're in the busy office otherwise. And while they're telling their stories, it's an ability to, well, you might qualify for this, or you might qualify for that, and we can lead them to other sources of funding that we wouldn't be able to do normally in the busy office. The other part of that is we did get state funding for fire hardening of homes. Got $5.7 million of that. Only $600,000 is spent because even in the state legislature, It takes time for all that to happen. And by the time it happened, a lot of people had already built. The incentive goes to the homeowner. The builder doesn't care anymore. It's a bad way to say it, but I don't know how else to say that. So now we're looking on ways and how we spend that money to give it back, after the fact. It is retroactive, but most people don't know that. One of the other things we did with the grant funding was, and this was one we were very proud of, is we got grant funding to get ourselves a grant writer. None of our office knew anything to do about that. How to do any of that. From the state level, it was like, well, we talked to our commissioners talked to the legislators, we got some state funding. But when we're talking about the CDBG money, when we're talking about the BRIC funding that's out there, the building resiliency money, that's all very complicated. And having somebody on board that you can actually navigate you through that is helpful. I guess I'll leave it with that.
Great.
Hi, and thank you for having me here.
Leaving it with funding, that's always good, Ted, with an audience like this. Thank you. So questions from the audience for the panel? I can. I can walk, thanks. Any questions from the audience? Hi.
Since you're all local people and having been involved in both sides of the relief recovery myself, something I haven't heard mentioned that I would like to ask about you is what you saw the role of the benefits and the possible detriments of the immediate response of faith-based organizations in the relief and recovery process.
Good question, thank you. Supervisors?
I'll start off with saying I don't think that there is actually a difference. Recovery and response, we need all hands on deck, absolutely. And I think you need to, dealing with a lot of Latinx communities, there's a model called the Promotores model, which is trusted partners. And you need to treat your faith-based community and nonprofits as trusted partners, because there are going to be those people that are more vulnerable. I'm Mexican, but I'm government. I've lost my street cred. So I'm going to need to have those trusted partners that can go and get me the people that I know I need to connect with services. So there is no downside to having faith-based organizations. Your downside is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and that is people are far too generous. And I literally was on national TV and said, I need you to stop. That's the downside. The downside is if you do not have, we have an organization in Napa County called Communities Organized Against Disaster, our COAD, and they meet in advance of disasters. So they know how we're going to need them to pump the brakes. They know what we're going to need, and we already have an organized system so that I don't end up with another 550 pairs of denim pants.
Right.
Because that happened in 2015 for the Valley Fire when we were their evacuation center. So the real downside is if you do not organize your nonprofit communities to know who that person, the point person is to direct them. This goes for in-kind, this goes for money donations, and food, folks. You do not want people, as generous as it is, feeding your first responders the backyard barbecue, right? So you need to get those things organized. So it's not a downside, it just means you've got to do the front end work.
Cool. Thank you. Supervisor Goss, I can't imagine that the collaborative didn't include faith-based
Oh,
organizations.
no, they were right there at the table and moving forward. Katie's from our town, and he saw it happening, and it was fantastic to be able to coordinate that. We did not have that coordination prior to the fire, but we learned really quickly, really fast about how to coordinate that. And Laura right here in front is our resource center coordinator, and she was amazing in coordinating all of that and all of the extra jeans and everything were just pouring in from all over the place. The water bottles, yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah, let's
huge,
not forget,
huge.
I mean, the pastors and priests in our community have their own network outside of disaster. Despite their many splintered belief systems. So that's always helpful. And they have buildings with rec rooms and kitchens, and they take people in without question. So great partners. Thank you for that. Question?
I'm just curious because we've been talking about response and things like that. I'm wondering now that you've had these experiences, if your local governments have allocated money towards preparedness, and if there's any receptiveness to like, okay, we went through this, let's educate our community about how we can be better prepared, better ready to evacuate, that kind of thing, and if that is really resonating with your constituents.
Great question. Thank you.
So I can answer that a little bit for
Please.
Boulder County. So like I said, we've been responding and recovering to disasters for 12 plus years. And the recovery and resiliency function of the county wasn't made a permanent function until last November. So my team of 2 have been temporary employees for whatever many years that is. So it took it took annual events to permanent the function, and then it's still just a staff of 2, right? So there's only so much capacity we have to do. So we have a really close relationship with our emergency management partners, and we do community engagement programming on resiliency and preparedness in the times we have the space to do it. But yeah, so our plan is to grow, dominate the world, like other people have said yesterday. But the fact that it took 10 plus years to get 2 of us permanent just shows how slow it is, even in the face of annual disasters.
Thank you, Gabe. Experience from Sonoma County or from City of Santa Rosa. Sorry about that.
Absolutely. In Santa Rosa, and like I mentioned, the whole kind of fabric of our thought process has changed since 2017. So prior to 2017, our Emergency Operations Center was something that we trained on maybe once a year as staff. And that Emergency Operations Center was up and running when the event occurred. We have gone from that to a warm Emergency Operations Center that's always up and running. We have gone from that to basically building the staff that manages that Emergency Operations Center. We've gone from that from basically putting a different lens on development, where you're taking more of a look at ingress and egress points, because that played itself out heavily in getting out of Coffee Park and the Fountain Grove areas. So it literally is factoring into all the decisions that are made in land development and general operations in the city. It truly has changed our culture.
And Supervisor, in a really rural county.
Yeah, we had a hazard mitigation plan already in effect for egress and whatnot, but what our Emergency Operations Center really wasn't truly, it was kind of a once a year kind of a training thing. So now all of a sudden I'm taking the ICS 300, ICS 400 trainings, and I'm learning about how to run an operations center, so that when you become a disaster worker, you want to be ready to go, and you want to be able to make those decisions. And it's key. It's huge.
It most definitely has become akin in government. A lot of times we'd say that community engagement was one of our goals. Disaster preparedness is now one of our goals. It's a way in which we do business now. I have a neon vest with my name and my district on it. That's how much it is a way in which we do business. We have gone from, we had a warm EOC because we got rocked in 2014 from the earthquake, and
Wasn't that fun?
Well, that was not a fire, but that earthquake took out the EOC that was the contingent EOC, so we built a warm EOC, a hardened warm EOC. We were ready to go, but we had a staff of 1.5 when the Napa complex fire broke out in 2017. We now have a staff of 4.5 on the Office of Emergency Services. For rebuild, you know, when Napa County doesn't build a lot of housing in the unincorporated because of the ag preserve. So in the 2017, we lost 26 years worth of housing. Adding Glass Fire and LNU, we got struck by both, right? We are at 35 years of housing gone. 35 years. So it is most definitely a way in which we not only are we rethinking it, but ladies and gentlemen, the state of California is forcing us to rethink it with the roads and street standards. When we had a caller last week call crying, saying, if you downzone my property, I won't be able to rebuild. And that was a 2017 fire loss. So you have to do it at the local level, because as we look at the encroachments into the WUI and the development that has happened in there at a regional level, at a state level, it's going to start happening more and more. So it's incumbent on us to be prepared for it, most definitely.
Great. Thank you. So we've got just a little time check, 5 minutes left, and I'd like to get to as many questions as possible.
Hi, I'm from Lake County. It's very emotional hearing all of this stuff because we just observed our 7th anniversary of the Valley Fire 2015. And all of that green stuff on the year 5 where we have posted challenges, that's all of our stuff. We're still facing huge, huge challenges. So I'm happy to hear some of the discussion about moving into disaster preparedness. And I have one other comment and one question. We are now on our 5th planning director in that many years because it has been so intense, including the cannabis code enforcement and all of that, having to deal with that. So it's all getting overwhelmed. What future do you see for county government helping to either initiate or support community training to take advantage of the coordination that has to occur at the hyper-local level so that we can support you guys and then help bring the other grants in where nonprofits are the ones that have to qualify?
Thank you. Supervisor Goss?
You bet. I just want to say that we up in Plumas County hit the ground running with our Dixie Fire Collaborative. We were finding challenges. They had 7, 8, 9 grant writers on board ready to go, and we didn't have a single one. And so we developed a partnership with the county and the Dixie Fire Collaborative to maximize all of that, use our leverage at the state and federal level to have them, fire up the grants, write the grants, pass them through us. We support them, pass them on up to the state and federal levels, and it's been working really well. And I can't wait to even get deeper into some of the bigger stuff.
Really great. So let's, in the time we have, I think there were a couple of questions in the back.
My name is Karen Wheeler-Clay, and I'm in Jackson County, Oregon. Hi, Ted. Thank you for being here. And then we have the rest of the Jackson County cohort over there in the corner. One of the things that I am wondering about is sort of the long-term collaboration across the public-private sector, right? Because there's some agility and resilience in a community with that sort of partnership happening, because there's places where one person can act that another can't, and so on and so forth. How have you seen that evolve and maybe solidify over time?
So we have our private partner in the room. I see, and if my eyes are serving me well, Napa Firewise, yes, in the house. So Napa Firewise is our nonprofit partner in mitigation work, prevention and mitigation work. And it is essential to know that as counties and in government, you cannot do it. Not only do we get strapped with contractual limitations and prevailing wage issues, and how we use our funds and allocations, but you really need to leverage those partnerships. And so one of those ways in doing it is we partnered with Napa Firewise to come up with our Community Wildfire Prevention Plan, our CWPP. And it was a county-wide plan, and I believe we were the first in the state to approve our 5-year CWPP. And we funded it initially the first year, but it's a collaborative where we go out and we are applying for funds. We are lobbying together at the state level to make sure that they have the money to do the work on the ground, and they are working closely with our county fire department, CAL FIRE contract, to make sure that we are targeting those key properties, those key zones that we know are just ready to go. And so it's ensuring that you have the right partners. It's not just at the initial response, right? Those are like our COAD partners, but you also want to look at your prevention partners, and you also want to look at your recovery partners as well.
Great, thank you, Supervisor. Ted, anything to add? Or?
Well, you see from the delegation we have here from Jackson County, it is, I have to say from the start, one of the things that happens is you have everybody who wants to help. They have money, they have organizations, the faith-based, everybody. There is a distinction between what government can do and what government can't do. And to have those alliances, you know, with the private sector and have somebody that can put those resources together with what the county can do and what the city can do, is threading a needle, and you really need to have an organization such as that to be able to bring that together, because the public doesn't necessarily understand that there's some things that we can do and can't do.
Yep.
And, you know, being able to collaborate, like even with the wildfire centers and the what programs are out there and what programs are not out there. That takes, you know, that takes the private sector to be able to get that word out. We can do press releases, we can do all sorts of things,
right.
But having that, you know, people on the ground is invaluable.
And on that good segue, final comment from Gabe about our experience.
Yeah, just really quick, and that's an incredibly valid point. I think what happens under a fire is the community recognizes what needs to be done, and we all come together. And we saw that really across the board. Give that 10 years from now, and when regular business starts coming back into the mix, how do you create those public-private relationships? So in our particular case, since the city of Santa Rosa doesn't build houses for people, the private construction industry does, we linked up with our North Coast Builders Exchange. We held regular meetings to resolve issues. We figured out where we could support, where we needed their support. That in Santa Rosa has continued because there's a driver to build housing in Santa Rosa. So we still partner, but where it becomes more challenging is when the rest of the world wants their stuff. So the fire rebuild was about 5% of our housing stock. The rest of development slowed for the first 3 years, but then that started trickling back in. So when you get back to your regular business, how do you solidify those relationships? It's incredibly important to do that. I think that makes us better as building officials and engineers and how we support that development process. But we solidified those meetings and we didn't let go of them. We held on to them. And it's a lot harder to do as time goes on, and you really have to make a commitment to do that.
Thank you. So, great panel. And two things I'd like to leave you with that I was thinking about in discussions with Jennifer for being here this morning. The first has to do with the immediate transition from response and into recovery. Santa Rosa is the biggest city in the county, and there's kind of a natural friction and sometimes jealousy between the two organizations. Get over it, Gabe.
I can't.
But one of the first things we acknowledged in response was that we had the beginnings of a really good collaborative. We were all tired. We all stunk. The kind of things that brings people together. But we also realized for our fire survivors, so we had a local assistance center. We set up one center because most people know they live in a community. They call it Santa Rosa. They don't know if they live in the unincorporated or they live in the city limits. And it shouldn't matter as fire survivors. So we made sure we had one place. So we had to get over and build on relationships really quickly. And then we did the same thing when it came to setting up our resiliency permit centers. We called it the same thing. We had the same process. We had the same protocols. We adopted the same ordinances for emergency housing. So there was one game plan for the entire community, no matter where you lived. That was really important. Second thing I would really impart, and that's why I was glad Jennifer assigned this panel to me, is the importance of the collaboration among administrative and elected officials. I was in the bunker for the 2015 earthquake. I was the only member of the plan section. We were operating off legal pads with pencils. It was pathetic. But fortunately, I had relationships with Napa County so we could collaborate and share building inspectors as we needed them. And moving to the 2017 fire, I saw there was a moment, there was a culture in our then emergency management service that's fortunately progressed since then, but there was a culture of no elected officials were even allowed in the emergency operations bunker. And public information officers were an anathema. They were literally shoved off in the corner of the building. Which just seemed wrong. And I knew it was, even though this was kind of my first big incident, I knew it was wrong when our local member of Congress, Mike Thompson, was outside and someone was actually directing a National Guardsman to not let that guy in the building. So I thought, all right, well, no. So having known the congressman for a while, I went out and welcomed him and brought him into the center, and we briefed him on everything we had gone through. This is the guy who's the number 3 member of the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives. You might not, frankly, he's a really fun guy. You may not like him, but for God's sake, that's the person who's going to be helping you get money. So you need to have a pre-established chain of command for communication, and you need to support your elected officials. These folks are the ones that, believe me, I know how many people follow the Permit Sonoma Facebook page. My numbers are meager compared to these two. Right? They've got thousands of people that are following them every day. Sometimes that's good, sometimes not so good, but they follow them. So if you have your PIOs, the public information officers, working with the electeds so they have the information, you get information, consistent information, out through multiple people way faster than people are going to follow any normal social media outlets for the bureaucracy. So super important to not divide the communication responsibilities, but to set up one system so everybody works together. So thank you for your indulgence and your time. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
You're not going to ask for your own round of applause?
No,
Very disappointed in that.
I'm a permit director, I don't get.
I know, I do. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a round of applause for Tennis Wick. Thank you. And thank you to all of our panel. I hope one of the things I love about this panel is you have elected officials and the practitioners that carry out all of the other parts of what needs to be done. To have both on a panel is one of the things that we really value. We highly value that kind of approach, and I just want to thank all of you for spending your time and investing to be here. And it's good to see you, Belia. It's been so long.